Is it more important for Jalen Hurts to have a big game or a clean game?
Both, or they can't win. So I don't think this is an either-or situation. We can show that I've shown it a number of times, the Chiefs in the turnover battle. Your only hope of beating the Chiefs is win the turnover battle.
Yeah.
If you tie them, you lose. The one win, again, the turnover was a pick six. If you beat them in the turnover battle, you probably lose, but you got a decent chance. 14-9 is, 60%. So he has to play a clean game because I believe the Chiefs will, or at least Patrick will. And then he also has to produce at a high level. So I don't think I think the Chiefs are too good for the Eagles to just be able to be like, we're going to run the ball, play good defense, not take any chances. I think that has worked for Philly against the bulk of the league, and that's been their recipe. I think they went into the Washington game thinking, man, Jaden's on such a heater, we're going to have to open it up. And they did, and Jalen was excellent. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I think it's going to have to be more of that for them to be able to win this game, Coach.
It's interesting because when you look back at the last Super Bowl, he had a really big game. So he threw for a touchdown, and his completion percentage was excellent, and then he ran for 3 touchdowns. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he put up giant numbers, and he was clutch, but he had that one mistake. So he had the one fumble, which now gets returned for a touchdown, which you could argue is easily the difference in the game. When you go into this season, and the beginning of the season, what were they trying to do? They were trying to have him have those big games. They were pushing him to throw the ball a lot, over 30 attempts, and they go 2-2. His numbers aren't very good. The rest of the season, they scale that back. His turnovers are extremely scaled back, and they win a ton of games. So he has the potential to have a big game. They've got the offensive weapons, on the outside, the receiving core, to have a big game. He's shown that he can have a big game in the Super Bowl as well. But I do think it's different this year than the last time they played because the defense is so much better. And the running game is different because of the explosiveness that Saquon presents, different than the last.
Yeah, was that Miles Sanders they're running?
Miles Sanders.
Yeah, they got yardage there, but there wasn't a threat for a 60-yarder here and there like there is with Saquon. I basically wrote down what you guys said. I think ideally you want to get both. Like you can't the room for error against the Chiefs is minuscule or non-existent. Like they have to be clicking everywhere. The defense has to play well. Saquon has to run the ball well. And then Jalen has to throw it well. If I had to pick one, I would say clean because, as you said, Coach, that was the difference 2 years ago. That one play, like when everybody was saying Jalen outplayed Mahomes, I was like, no, he didn't because the one turnover cost him a game. They were up 14. I get it was second quarter. Who knows what would have happened. But it was 14-7. They were marching in, just got in Kansas City territory. And then an unforced fumble, and it's 14-all now, and it's a whole different game.
So here's where I disagree about that turnover in last year's game. If you just follow me on it.
The Super Bowl?
I'm sorry, in the Super Bowl. And I shouldn't say last year. It was 3rd and 6 when it happened, and the play was stopped. Like he was unforced, but he was bottled up and right. Sure. So they were about to punt. When you say marching, they were going to get 0 points out of that drive. Now, we can say maybe the Chiefs wouldn't have scored, but even with that turnover, the Eagles went into half up 24-14. They went into the half up 10 points, even with, the Chiefs scooped and scored, and the Eagles scored 10 straight points that had they punted, I don't even know if they would have had time to have 2 more possessions the way they did. So they recovered from that. Where I disagree,
but from a momentum standpoint,
right?
But Coach, my point is
that it's dramatic to have a turnover. It was bad when it's a turnover, scoop and score.
But I guess my point is, how much did the momentum actually happen if right after that momentum shift, the Eagles scored 10 straight points and then halftime happens? It was because of the scoop and score, it was 14-14. Halftime score of the game was 24-14 Philly. And then the Chiefs got every single yard imaginable in the second half. The other thing that's happening, that I'm hearing, people are, to me, revisionist historying that Eagles team defense. Josh, you can tell. I don't know if they were numbered top 3 in yards or points. I don't remember which. It might have been both. I know that they were top 3 defense, and they had the most sacks of any team in more than 30 years. It was like since a late 80s Bears team.
Right, but remember how slippery that field was.
Oh, yeah.
Very
You're driving me crazy. So I look at this Eagles team as, even though the defensive personnel is different, incredibly similar to last year's Eagles team across the board, with the exception of Saquon Barkley, which is a huge exception. Like, don't get me wrong, which is why I think that Jalen has to have a big game, because if they scored 30, the Chiefs against this defense, not the same defense, they scored 38 points. The Chiefs, and we look back on it, it was not Tyreek Hill. It was a Chiefs offense that was dink and dunk like it was all year, and Mahomes came together and scored 38 points.
That was the year he was MVP.
He was MVP of the league. But it was to running backs and tight ends. It was Juju was their big wide receiver weapon. I just don't think.
Well, they had Travis Kelce, who was pretty good too.
Well, they still do. The Chiefs still have of course. My point is they still have Travis Kelce. I don't think the Eagles can rely on the recipe that worked all year, because this is the best team they have faced by far. And I think that they are going to need to get an elite performance from their highest paid player. I mean, I don't think that's...
And again, I'll have to look back, but this Eagles defense now has 10 turnovers in the postseason.
Yeah.
And they haven't given the ball up once. I don't know if that defense was as opportunistic during that time frame as it was
The
now.
strength of that defense was the pass rush.
Yeah, it was
everywhere else.
Rotation of the
I think this
line.
team is better everywhere else.
Go ahead.
So I know this is a little bit off of the Jalen Hurts storyline, but Coach, do you think the Eagles defense is forcing these turnovers, obviously, but it feels like turnovers is something that can come and go? Sometimes it feels like the ball just gets slippery, and other times, like, you know what? We saw it with the Cowboys defense. I was like, man, they have too many turnovers. I think that's going to come back to the middle.
Yeah, there are teams that are more opportunistic than others, and typically that means that the secondary has really good ball skills. You have guys that have a knack for generating plays on the ball into turnovers, or you've got a significant amount of sacks, and in those sacks, they're hitting the quarterback, and that's creating turnovers. So there's a couple different components to it, and they can come in bunches. I'm just saying, as much as it should be a clean game for Philly can put pressure on Kansas City now to have a clean game as well, and that's what they've done to their two opponents so far.
And the turnover thing is one of the things that, if you're handicapping this game neutrally, which obviously is almost impossible for me to do, but I try to do it going into it. I look at it and say, okay, one of these teams got here through the playoffs by being up 10-0 on turnover margin. That seems almost impossible. The other team got here despite forcing 0 turnovers the entire postseason and just winning a game where there were 5 fumbles and the other team recovered all 5. And so, because what you're alluding to is turnovers are something that variance has a big. Yes, there are certain teams that are excellent at it, but there's a lot of variance to it. That, to me, is a big check mark in the Chiefs' favor. That they have been able to win without forcing turnovers, and the Eagles have historically forced turnovers on this road to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's a little bit counterintuitive.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get more from the show and to check out clips from other shows on FS1.